The Factory. Anomalies in the SCP universe come from a wide variety of origins. Some come from other galaxies or other dimensions, some appear through accidents, often related to other SCPs, and many are created or manufactured by various anomalous entities or groups. We've already looked at a couple of groups known for creating anomalies, Dr. Wondertainment and Are We Cool Yet? And while both of them have put out things that are inherently dangerous, they are generally seen as lighter-hearted groups. Another group known for creating things, though, is the Factory, but their anomalies tend to be far darker in nature, and often much more dangerous. I've looked at a few things that the Factory has been responsible for, such as the fake Heart of the Broken God in the Ouroboros cycle, but there's plenty more. Like many groups of interest in the SCP universe, the Factory is mysterious. Its organization, goals, and methods of operation are pretty much a complete mystery, and the only thing really known for certain is that they possess the capability to churn out all sorts of anomalies. The few bits of information we have on the group itself come from a few different sources, including the Global Occult Coalition, Nobody, the Serpent's Hand, and Marshall Carter in Dark. The problem is that each source tends to partially contradict another one, lending more mysteriousness to the group. The GOC state that the Factory is primarily stationed in the Midwestern US and several countries with poor labor laws, reportedly founded in 1835. They have no other information about who is part of the Factory, their organizational structure, or their goals, but they appear to be self-funded through the sale of mass-produced anomalies. The Serpent's Hand provides more info, but how trustworthy the information is up in the air. They claim that the Factory, or the Robber Barons as they refer to them as, are a trans-universal concept that moves between realities, albeit with great difficulty. In each reality, they appear as a twisted and corrupt amalgamation of recent successful businesses and organizations, and recruit workers from the local populace. From the way the Serpent's Hand describes them, the Factory is akin to a reality-hopping infection that corrupts and drains each world they stop off on through the creation of anomalies. Either way, the Serpent's Hand don't seem like big fans. Marshall Carter and Dark don't mind them, though, considering them to be one of their suppliers. They list various locations where the Factory has a presence, including England, Japan, the US, and China. They note that the Factory manufactures items through the use of an alchemical molecular printer, which is fueled primarily through the dismembered limbs of workers, who then replace their limbs with prosthetics. MC&D plans on buying up stock of something the Factory creates called glittering salmon, which they will then modify and sell back to the Factory employees in order to reduce pain caused by injuries. In the Factory SCP-001 proposal, we looked at a potential origin for the group, specifically as a massive tainted factory built in 1835, which aligns with what the GOC mentioned. That proposal describes a scenario in which the Foundation essentially got its start from the remnants of that factory, but it's rather limited in view when considering the overall scope of the group. So all we really know is that there's an individual or group of individuals somewhere out there that continue to pump out abnormal products for an unknown purpose. That's pretty flimsy, I'll admit, but the real interesting bits are in the SCPs themselves, so let's take a look at a few. Let's start by looking at a couple of the products that the Factory has mass-produced and put out into the world, only to be contained by the Foundation. SCP-248 is a small booklet filled with stickers, each reading 110%, with the words "The Factory" in small print in the corner. The booklet was discovered at a small house in Georgia after one of the stickers was placed on an old, half-disassembled tractor by the youngest son. The tractor was suddenly able to run as if it were fully functional, despite lacking much of the frame and engine. Testing with the tractor revealed that it operates as if it were in pristine condition and is capable of achieving speeds slightly faster than would be expected, but still requires gasoline in order to function. A sticker was then placed onto a computer, resulting in its storage space increasing by 10%, its RAM reaching 110% efficiency, the heat sink pulling off 10% more heat, and electricity flowed through the system 10% more smoothly than the best modern superconductors. A test was done with a D-class to see if the effects worked on organic material, but it failed to produce any observable results. The sticker was removed from the D-class after a great deal of effort, removing the D-class's skin with it, despite chemical analysis of the adhesive to be consistent with everyday Scotch tape. Attempts to remove the sticker from the tractor completely failed, so a second sticker was added instead. The tractor did end up reaching speeds equal to 220% of its default, but after 15 minutes it began to show advanced signs of rusting. After 36 minutes, it had almost completely turned to rust, at which point both stickers fell off and were no longer anomalous. Overall, that one's really just incredibly useful, with very little downsides, although it does beg the question of whether or not things will rust and fall apart with only one sticker before too long. SCP-585 are a group of 4 two-hole pencil sharpeners made of brightly colored plastic, with "The Factory" printed on their undersides. The pencil sharpeners operate as normal on a pencil up to a certain point. If a pencil continues to be sharpened using 585, its sharpness will continue to increase without any apparent limit. The effect can be reverted by inserting the pencil into the other hole and rotating it counterclockwise, although the lost mass from pencil shavings will not be restored. A typical pencil will reach its normal maximum sharpness after 20 rotations, with tests showing a pencil after 30 rotations can be dropped from 1 meter and embed itself 10 centimeters into a solid steel bar. After 40 rotations, the pencil was dropped from 1 meter into bedrock, penetrating down half a meter. After 50 rotations, it penetrated 5 meters, and after 60 rotations, it penetrated down 50 meters. You know, the Foundation has to keep going until something explodes, so they continued sharpening it until 100 rotations were done. At this point, the tip of the pencil began radiating extreme heat, resulting in the wooden part of the pencil bursting into flames. The pencil was then inserted into the other hole in the sharpener, causing the sharpener to melt, leaving only 3 of them left. It's noted that the sharpeners were originally recovered from an elementary school after an expunged event. Alright, that's a little bit more of what we expect from the factory, as there's really not much benefit from that, since the sharpeners only work on pencils. What exactly the factory's goal was in releasing those things into the wild, let alone an elementary school, remains a mystery. I mentioned Dr. Wondertainment earlier, and SCP-2933 brings a potentially interesting connection between the two groups. 2933-1 is a partially submerged steel structure within a large saltwater reservoir. Both the exterior and interior of the structure are extremely rusted, with several features having disintegrated completely. It's currently believed that this structure was designed to contain 2933-A. The interior of the structure is essentially a shifting labyrinth, with passages having been observed changing, moving, or disappearing completely. Currently, it's believed that all of the passages within the structure lead to 2933-A, and once inside, there is no way to return to the entrance. Additionally, any individual or machine that enters the structure will slowly begin to show signs of rusting on their exterior surface, with the affliction believed to be permanent. This corrosion will spread across the entirety of their exterior before affecting their internals. The speed of this process increases as the subject approaches 2933-A. As is typical in these situations, a D-class is chucked in to see what the place is all about. As soon as he enters, he remarks that there's something bad in there, a sense of foreboding that's built into the walls of the structure. He also hears something faint that sounds like metal grinding on metal. After some time, Command tells him to return to the entrance, but he says that he's already been trying, and he doesn't think there's a way out. He also tells them that his skin is starting to flake off, like it's rusted. As he descends the structure to gather more data, the temperature continues to rise, as well as the level of gaseous pollutants in the air. The grinding sound continues to grow louder, and the skin affliction he's experiencing is burning him, spreading up towards his face. He eventually comes across a person in the bowels of the structure, 2933-A. The voice picked up by command is noticeably distorted and metallic sounding, but the individual greets the D-Class in a friendly tone, although it suddenly screams in the middle of its sentence. It introduces itself as Mr. Smiles, which it says is tattooed on its leg, although when the D-Class looks at it, it actually says Mr. Scary, property of the factory. When the entity scratches the rust away, though, it says Mr. Smiles, from Little Misters by Dr. Wondertainment. The D-Class asks him what he's doing here, to which the entity replies that his father built this place for him and told him that it would keep him safe, or it would keep people safe from him. He doesn't remember. He screams again during the explanation, and a deep metallic groaning sound is heard in the structure. He says that everything hurts, but it's okay, as his father told him that he will come back for him once he was finished. He further explains that his father was very sick, as the rust was inside of him, so he promised Mr. Smiles that if he took the rust from him, he would be able to make smiles for everyone. After he gave the rust to Mr. Smiles, though, he was afraid, as Mr. Smiles says that there's just something about the rust that terrifies his father, and he didn't even want to look at him. Mr. Smiles continues to groan in agony throughout the conversation as metallic sounds are heard within the structure. Mr. Smiles is certain that his father is out there, making smiles for people, and he'll come back for him someday soon. The D-Class asks him about the rusting of his skin, but Mr. Smiles says that there's nothing you can do about it, and the pain only gets worse. Once you have the rust inside of you, it just spreads and spreads, until there's nothing left but oil, smoke, and rust. It seems that Dr. Wondertainment possessed this rust infection that is related to the factory, and managed to pass it on to one of his little Mr. creations, Mr. Smiles. Mr. Smiles was then placed into this special structure to prevent him from leaving, and now he lives in perpetual agony with the hope that someday Dr. Wondertainment will return and remove the rust from him. What exactly the rust is unknown, although it's somewhat of a common theme with factory products, as we saw with the tractor with the double stickers on it. This isn't the only article to potentially link Wondertainment and the factory, as a couple tales include the idea that Wondertainment was a former employee of the factory that managed to escape. Moving on, SCP-4511 is a large mechanical construct made of iron, resembling a domestic pig. It's located in the basement of a disused meatpacking factory in Chicago, and measures 15 meters by 25 meters by 20 meters at its widest points. Its primary entrance point is a large blast furnace, which is in a constant state of activation despite being disconnected from all fuel lines and ignition sources. It also possesses a thin slit on its left flank that, upon certain conditions being met, will produce an index card containing a series of instructions. The structure is overall heavily rusted. The Foundation first discovered the factory and the construct after investigating some reports of occult activity in the area. In the basement of the factory, they encountered heavy resistance from a group of occult worshippers, resulting in the Chicago PD and embedded Foundation agents taking out 46 of the cultists, with one survivor being heavily injured. An index card was discovered within the construct, reading, "Current demand, a flock of my own. Satisfied." Every 12 hours after containment, 4511 produced an identical copy of the card, until the surviving cultist passed away from his injuries. At this point, a new index card was produced reading, "Current demand, the metal teeth that endlessly turn. Period, 1 week." It's unclear what happened after 1 week, but what followed was a series of other demands that the Foundation decided to acquiesce to. The next demand was the metal of this suffocating prison, to which the Foundation threw 57 pieces of scrap iron from around the factory into its blast furnace. The sounds of metal crunching persisted for 2 minutes, and 3 hours later, all of the gears in the factory rapidly rusted, although 4511 was unaffected. The next demand was for oil to slicken my frozen joints, to which the Foundation threw 3 200-liter drums of machine oil into its blast furnace. Low-pitched gurgling was heard for 38 minutes before the remains of the oil drums were expelled, and the construct shook violently for 4 minutes. Afterwards, a large amount of rusted scrap iron and 2 domesticated pig femurs were also expelled. The third demand was for 2 of my children, made in my image, made in flesh. So the Foundation gathered 2 adult domestic pigs, 1 male and 1 female, and forced them into the blast furnace. The 2 pigs passed through the first layer of fire without harm, and were obscured from view. 5 seconds later, high-pitched squeals were heard for 25 seconds, and for 47 minutes afterwards, a low-pitched gurgling sound was heard. The next demand was for the hooks used to hang my children's corpses, so 17 meat hooks from around the factory were thrown in, resulting in metal crunching sounds being heard for 11 minutes before a spherical metal object was forcefully expelled, killing an agent. The agent's body was then also thrown into the blast furnace. The fifth demand was for a canine. First, I consume his best friend, then him. A German Shepherd was tranquilized and forced in, after which yelping was heard for 27 minutes before the dog was expelled back out. 55 minutes later, 7 teeth were expelled out at high speeds, 6 of which were dog teeth and 1 was a human canine tooth. The sixth demand was for a worker for the line, to which the Foundation decided to toss in a D-class that had died earlier due to natural causes. The construct emitted loud crunching noises before abruptly ejecting the corpse, which was now extremely disfigured due to heat damage and repeated blunt force trauma, as well as lacking several internal organs. The seventh demand was again for a worker for the line, to which the Foundation forced a living D-class in. Screaming was then heard for 2 hours. 34 minutes later, a liquid mixture of human blood, pig urine, machine oil, and rust began leaking from the construct for 46 minutes, with the human portion of the liquid being a genetic match for the lead researcher. The eighth demand was for a youth to grow in the factories. The subject and the results are redacted, but it's noted that the subject was forced into the construct using an electric shock prod. The ninth demand was for fuel for my internally burning fire, so 450 kilograms of refined coal from the factory were shoveled in. The flames in the blast furnace grew by 60% immediately, resulting in the death of one of the researchers and another being injured. The factory began to shake violently for 3 hours and 22 minutes, and 55 minutes after the shaking began, groaning was heard beneath the construct. The 10th and final demand was for the false foreman, delivered to my maw to prove your faith. The lead researcher, who initially objected to the testing, was shot in the leg with a pistol before being thrown in. Screaming is heard for 4 minutes and 17 seconds before ceasing. The regional director that authorized the tests received word of the results of the 10th demand, and decides to send in an MTF to check things out. The contents of the fuse box for the elevator leading to the basement are revealed to be sealed to the door with what seems to be a layer of fat. They eventually get the elevator moving, but it stops along the way down as the lights turn off. They force the elevator doors open, revealing all of the lights in the basement to be off. As they walk across the catwalks, they step into a puddle of urine, and look up to find a fleshy growth attached to the ceiling that is leaking the liquid. They walk down to the basement floor, but realize that one of their members is not responding, so they retreat back up to the catwalks and find her unconscious with a large wound in her right thigh. She regains consciousness but doesn't know what happened to her. Since she can't walk, they decide to leave her on the catwalks as they continue traversing the basement. They find SCP-4511, next to which is a large pile of white-coated bodies that appear to have had the blood drained from them, with a figure sitting on the floor next to the pile. The figure is wearing a researcher uniform and stands up, showing a large burn scar across his cheek, and is holding something in his hand. The MTF tells him to drop it, but he replies that whatever they can do to him is nothing compared to what it can do. He says that he took their oil to feed it, and he'll take theirs as well. He says that they can't win, because if they kill him, it wins, and they'll never let it win. The MTF responds by shooting him in the head, resulting in a rumbling sound emanating from the construct. The member that shot the man walks forward and takes the thing he was holding, an index card and a small clump of bloody flesh. The card reads, "Meat from those who seek to do in my faithful." The agent picks up the piece of flesh and throws it into the blast furnace, causing the flames to expand. The team leader chastises the agent, who doesn't know why they just did that, but the team retreats back up to the catwalks. The agent who was injured is now unmoving, with her gun next to her. They grab her and retreat out of the factory. The regional director decides to take over as lead researcher on the project for the time being, remarking that this anomaly is more dangerous than they originally gave it credit for. 2 hours after the MTF left, the construct produced another index card before ceasing all activity, reading, "Current demand, a flock of my own. Satisfied." It's clear now that whatever is responsible for 4511 is capable of compelling individuals around it to carry out its bidding. The Foundation essentially played right into its hands. To be honest, this one didn't really have anything to do with the factory organization, but rather it's just related to creepy factories, and I didn't know where else I'd cover it, so there you go. Let's finish by taking a look at a creepy factory that is related to the organization, SCP-748. 748 is an abandoned industrial complex located in Massachusetts, capable of mass production through anomalous means. It was originally constructed beneath a normal, non-anomalous factory, but it appears to be incomplete based on hallways ending in dead ends, walled doorways, and wires and pipes that connect to nothing. The machines contained within the complex are all rusted, damaged, and mostly disabled, but documents indicate that when active, they would have required a level of power on par with a fusion reactor, although the Foundation has yet to locate their power source. Posters throughout the factory display various motivational slogans, such as, "A hard worker is a happy worker," and "Active minds lead to idle hands." The first subterranean floor of 748 consists of 8 hallways that converge into a circular room equipped with a large mechanical lift. The hallways are cell blocks designed to house the factory's workers, with the capability of housing somewhere between 4,000 to 6,000 individuals, albeit in crowded and unsanitary conditions. The second floor is a rectangular chamber apparently designed for the packaging and shipping of products, despite its distance from the surface. There are 3 identical machines present, labeled after 3 Greek wind deities, and it's believed that their purpose was related to the transportation of objects. There is also a 4th machine against another wall, but it has been destroyed. Scattered throughout the area were heavily rusted crates containing anomalous products. These products include 500 highly radioactive rocking horses that are biologically alive and scream when observed, 500 fur coats crafted from pelts of various unknown creatures that are perpetually on fire, 2,000 rifles that superficially resemble the M1903 Springfield but possess a high Hume level, meaning a high level of unreality. 800 bowler hats that cannot be removed once worn and cause the wearer to expel wasps from every orifice. 200,000 cigarettes that transform the consumer into a shark once consumed and result in the individual exploding after complete transformation. And 10 metric tons of highly radioactive rotten meat from a hybrid species of human, pig, and squid. The third floor is a semicircular chamber consisting of conveyor belts, pneumatic tubes, electron tubes, and pipes that lead into a large machine, seemingly capable of anomalously constructing practically anything. It seems that this machine suffered significant damage at some point in the past, likely in the early 1950s. The factory was originally built in 1882 by Randolph T. Metzger as a textile mill, with the factory underneath secretly built between 1896 and 1908. The surface factory was shut down and abandoned in 1915, becoming a popular spot for urban explorers, although a number of disappearances eventually led the Foundation to discover and contain 748 in 1992. We're given a brief biography on Metzger, who was known for possessing a rags-to-riches story and employed 70% of the population of the city where his Massachusetts factory was located. Unfortunately, he was also known for the absolutely dismal working conditions in his factories, eventually leading to a bombing at the Massachusetts factory in 1895. This led Metzger to start the construction of 748, and based on his private journal, he had aligned himself with an entity known as the Investor, an unidentified figure capable of supplying anomalous technology. Metzger would eventually commit suicide in 1915 by a gunshot to the head, although none of his brain matter was found, and his family and household servants were never seen again. Next, we have some entries from various journals and letters, starting in 1896, with Metzger writing that the deal has been made, and he regrets nothing, as they are all necessary sacrifices. It's simply good business, and the Investor has promised him much. In 1897, an employee of his named Brianna wrote a letter to her mother, but never sent it, in which she describes the new factory that Metzger is building, and how he seems to be a changed man that is promising them large dormitories and higher wages. In 1900, a Polish employee at the factory writes that there are so many floors to the factory now, and they were working with another employee when suddenly they disappeared. They asked an overseer about it, and they were told not to worry about it, but after asking again, they were beaten. They write that they're not sure why, and that the overseer has no face. Metzger writes in 1902 that the machine has come online well ahead of schedule, and the Janus doors are locked to their intended destinations, allowing for an endless supply of raw materials. He confirms that the machine can produce anything he wishes, and states that the factory bends to his will, the workers live at his mercy alone, and he is God here. In 1906, another employee writes that this place is a prison that they cannot leave, and thousands of employees continue to enter the factory while it continues to grow in size. She overheard the overseers saying that this factory is just one of many, all connected by the Janus doors. The employees' meals are apparently injected into them, giving them just enough to stay alive and useful, and she complains about the deafening noise from both the machines and the screaming. People work themselves to death and are then thrown into the production machine. They make everything from food, to toys, to clothes, to weapons, unlike anything she could imagine. They are allowed 4 hours of sleep each night, but she often wakes to the sound of harvest men, who apparently collect certain people, likely to also throw into the machine. Metzger writes in 1912 that the Investor dreams of war, which explains the current demands, but he is being kept in the dark about their goals. He worries that he has just become another cog in this machine and has no place in its future. In 1915, he writes that this wasn't what he was promised. In 1996, a few years after containment, the Foundation found a blockage of bone and scrap metal in several large pipes in the complex. The removal of the blockage resulted in a flood of water that killed 11 personnel, but electrical lights turned on throughout the factory, and a hole opened up in the central elevator shaft, leading to another floor. The fourth floor is a spherical chamber containing 200 pillar-shaped machines attached to one another, each housing a glass cylinder containing a green liquid and a preserved human brain. Each of the brains are biologically alive but have suffered damage consistent with lobotomy. They all connect to a large and intricate machine comparable to an incredibly complex analog computer, related to the control and management of the factory. Contained within this machine is a living human brain that claims to be Randolph T. Metzger, although it's unknown how it can speak and hear. An interview is conducted with Metzger's brain, in which he asks if the investor sent them and if he wants to parlay after all these years. Metzger chastises the interviewer for speaking as if they were equals, and when the interviewer says that they are just a researcher, Metzger calls him a liar and says that they are more than just researchers. The Foundation decides to reveal a bit of information in order to learn more from Metzger. They tell him that they are an organization that deals with anomalies, such as him, which surprises Metzger, as he says that his current state is just a trade secret. He was aghast at first to have his brain placed in this jar, but the investor decided to do it to increase efficiency in the factory, and that's all that matters. He says the investor was a very wealthy man, even wealthier than him, and he believes that the investor made his fortune from the shadows, with every loose coin falling his way. Metzger says that the parasites of the world called them robber barons, but if they were barons, the investor was emperor. In the end, the investor knew he was losing control and decided to end the project. The interviewer asks about the purpose of the factory, to which Metzger says it is to take industry to its logical conclusion. The other brains in this room are just additional places to store his memory, but there are many factories just like this one. The doctor ponders why Metzger has such a limited interest in conversation, and how else he might be occupying his time. Not long after, 6 Foundation personnel disappear within the factory, each one out of sight at the time of disappearance. Metzger simply stated that accidents happen, and their safety is not his concern. In 1999, the Foundation re-evaluates SCP-748, finding that it's currently uncontained, as there are potentially hundreds of such complexes across the globe, all linked via dimensional anomalies. Sometime after the discovery of Metzger, the Foundation facility set up above 748 was breached and destroyed in what's been called an Alpha Mammon event. These events involve the harvest of materials and their transmutation into products by entities that appear roughly human but have undergone extensive mechanical and surgical augmentation. It's believed that they are former employees of 748, as well as missing Foundation personnel, and possess a rusted iron cage attached to their backs for the collection of materials. Their left hands have been replaced with tools, typically sickles or circular saws. Their faces consist of simply a flaring horn, similar to those used in early phonographs, and they are capable of rendering themselves intangible. This makes them unable to interact with the physical world, but they can manifest and demanifest at any location, making containment impossible. An Omega Mammon event involves the manifestation of various SCP-748 products at retail locations, with a side effect of causing employees and owners of said locations to ignore the abnormal nature of these products. Money used to purchase these products vanishes as soon as it's placed within a register, and credit card transactions will go through, but the money is transferred to an unknown destination. Purchased products from the first Omega Mammon event near 748 resulted in 56 casualties, and events have been reported globally in the time since. SCP-748 itself is currently in a metamorphic state, constantly changing and warping, which has resulted in 32 fatalities. Some audio was recovered from the remnants of the Foundation site above 748, which seems to consist of Metzger speaking with similar individuals across the globe, although we can only hear Metzger. He tells Liverpool that it's time to get back to work, and is happy that Tokyo has survived, although he says it's a pity they slept through the war, since it would have been quite profitable. Metzger says that the Infinity Engine has been reactivated, and the Crucible demands fresh material. The world will be that of producer and consumer, and those who refuse will be industrialized, with them fulfilling their destiny and becoming one with the free market. He finishes by declaring that the factory is back in business. That was a long one, but I think it's an important one for providing some further insight into the factory. Based on this, the entity or entities behind the factory influence the most industrious individuals on the planet to anomalously create massive amounts of food, supplies, equipment, and weapons for seemingly the purpose of war. It's also likely that based on what the Serpent's Hand believe, they do this process across multiple realities and universes, combining everything into something unimaginably massive. What war is the factory preparing for? Who is it against? And who are the soldiers in the factory's army? It's likely that if they are building towards some sort of war or some other nefarious goal, humans are just a small cog in their machine.